Welcome to a new episode of Revenue Architects. This podcast is tailored for the revenue leaders navigating the evolving landscape of sales, RevOps, and revenue management. Today, we have a special guest, Jonas Samsioe, SVP level revenue and go-to-market operations expert who scaled revenue in sales ops at a global SaaS organization from 180 million to 1.6 billion. Jonas, welcome to the show. Tell us how you got into sales and revenue operations.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Very excited to be here. I sort of fell into sales and revenue operations. So I've been in the marketplace for over 20 years, and it's really sales and revenue operations. The titles, in my opinion, have only been around maybe 10 years at most. It certainly wasn't something that existed when I got started. Post-college, I moved into consulting, worked for two of the big five. And it was interesting. I learned a lot about getting up to speed fast on a company and helping them out. But I felt something lacking inside myself. Namely, I want to start my own company. So this is at the beginning of 2000s, before the dot-com original boom and bust. So because we're talking here today about my role and I have a title, it was clearly a bust, but we learned a lot going into it. We basically set up a B2C marketplace, which was way ahead of its time, but it was a fun learning experience. Shortly after that, I ended up going into sales. So I carried my own book. I learned a lot about that. And it's a tough job being in sales, like not knowing you have a draw and not knowing you can pay rent, but you don't know how well you're going to live afterward if you don't sell. Anyway, so after that, I got my MBA. So I did my MBA in Europe. I'm originally from Sweden, so it was a natural segue for me. And I moved into sales management. I worked for a Swedish company out of the UK, focused on educational sales. Did that for a few years, but missed my time back in the US. So I moved back to New York and got lucky and landed a job with American Express, which really set the groundwork for sort of rolling together everything that I had done in my past into field effectiveness, which wasn't sales enablement. It was basically the beginnings of sales and revenue operations, more sales operations than anything else. We supported roughly 150 salespeople within the United States, and their job was basically to travel around to different markets and make sure that the American Express card was accepted for payments. So, for example, we'd work closely with the corporate card, and they would say, hey, we landed a corporate client out of, Austin, Texas, and they're saying that there aren't enough restaurants over there who accept the card for payment. So we built out a territory model for the 150 salespeople. So whoever had the Austin territory would basically take that upon themselves. And if the territory is bigger than what they could cover for the corporate card, we'd put a little tiger team together and send a bunch of salespeople down there for a couple of days to go and literally boots on the ground and sign up restaurants. And key here was that it had to be companies that already accepted credit cards, because trying to get companies to accept credit cards is a very different premise than getting them just to accept the American Express card. Anyway, learned a lot on the job, perfected my Excel skills. We built out a territory model using data from Dun & Bradstreet, and that's a foreshadowing to my next role. We built out data using Dun & Bradstreet originally to be able to model out the size of the territories, but that quickly could flip that on its end and turn it into a lead generation model, because we knew all the companies in the US and we knew the American Express landscape, and we could merge the two together and ended up with a set that didn't already take the card. So we created a few generations of that, and it turned into a solid lead generation model for Amex. Dun & Bradstreet approached me and basically wanted to pitch that to other customers. So I jumped ship over to DNB, and I worked with them for a few years. They got bought up by private equity. And as a single guy in New York City, moving to Short Hills wasn't high on my list. I started my own company, actually. And that's where I was able to hone a lot of my sales and revenue operations skills across a smaller segment of the company sizes. Obviously, having worked with Deloitte before, you're not a startup to typically hire Deloitte unless you're a alumni of them and they want to invest in your company. worked for Amex, which is obviously a multi-billion-dollar company. But now, living in New York, I was basically doing consulting for equity and making sure that small businesses that had a great idea could basically set up and scale a sales organization. So for me, it was a mixed bag of being able to sell myself. I'd go to startup events and, for lack of a, just basically talk to people and see what their problems were. And then we would swoop in and help them out, set up, hire their first salespeople and hire maybe their first sales leader, and setting up the back end systems to run effectively, to set themselves up for maybe not an IPO, but certainly as an acquisition target, or at least setting themselves up to have some revenue. So that was super exciting. It was a fun part of my life. And I was able to basically pivot that into a permanent role over in Florida with a company called DCR Workforce. Why? Because my daughter was born, and it's always a good idea to have good health insurance when you have a kid. So that's why I ended up taking a full-time role, and it put me in Florida, which was a lot warmer than what I was living. And my then wife, not girlfriend anymore, and I had got much more space to move into. And my second child, Grayson, was actually born in Boca, where we moved. Long story short, the company had Google as a customer. And so we set them up to basically mimic, like we had to analyze how was a 250 person company able to get Google as a customer. And that was a key focus for us. And we were able to replicate that to get a handful of other large customers. And then eventually the company sold to a public company out of San Francisco. And that left me open to find another role. And I was lucky enough to find a very large SaaS company down in Miami that at the time wasn't large at all, but we grew it to be very successful. We grew the sales team from maybe 100 people to a go-to-market engine of roughly 1,400 people, including all the instrumentation that comes with it. A lot of growing pains, but very exciting period in time. We had a very prolific CEO who basically drove the path forward. We did a lot of acquisitions. It's private equity owned, so our parents basically had good belief in the company, and we were able to invest in, among other things, a public company. So it's a very exciting time. And now we're talking here.
So welcome. I think you have a very exciting career journey. Very few people who do consulting, who do sales, who do their own company, right? Go back into business and now start scaling small to mid-sized businesses and get there. So I'm very excited to jump into our conversation. And I think the first most important role that revenue operations plays is on forecasting. And every company wants a very accurate forecast, but very few organizations truly have that discipline of having their systems and processes and cadence in place to really provide that kind of forecast. And forecast means might be deal, might be revenue, right? Might be something that the company really reports, right? So my question to you really is, how do best RevOps teams, in your opinion, with your experience, stay ahead of this curve when it comes to forecasting, and what rituals or operational habits you have seen that actually work in a predictable forecast?
Yeah, so very good question. With the last company I was with, it was very much driven from the bottoms up, which is the company I worked for basically set up a sales factory, if you will, where we had a very high velocity deals, lower ASP. So it was not an enterprise sale. DCR, however, was an enterprise sale. So that's very different because literally a deal can make or break the forecast. In a sales factory, you actually don't necessarily want to forecast any whales because they will break the forecast too much. You're better off deprecating them almost entirely, and then you let management know about them, but there's maybe a 10% chance of getting them even up until the end. So you almost leave them out of the forecast. You can leave it, the manager may not forecast it, but the director and the VP know about them, so they can choose whether or not to forecast them because there's a little bit more flex in the upper end of the hierarchy. But the company I worked with was a very big believer in a bottoms-up forecast. How did that pan out? The reps had weekly meetings with their managers. We call this a territory report card process, whereby the manager would basically prep for the meeting. We would record the meeting, even if it was in person, just to ensure that the manager actually did what they said they did. And we could also apply AI to conversation itself to basically see how are the reps talking about their forecast. And this deal came in after the fact. It was on the forecast. You guys talked about it, but it didn't have maybe the timeliness, the budget wasn't there. Whatever the case, it enabled us to apply AI to the recording and get better results out of it. But basically, the rep wouldn't necessarily put in a forecast. They would present their deals to the manager. The manager would then help them go through, okay, so this deal you say is closing next week, but you don't know who the financial approver is. It's $1,000 deal. Okay, no big deal. But if it's a $10,000 deal, $15,000 deal, which was at that company on maybe the top 40% of deals, there's some people that you need to be able to be part of that deal. So the manager now knows all the deals that make up his or her forecast, and they are able to forecast. And we asked for a weekly forecast by the manager. This company had basically 70% of deals were found and closed within quarter. So the forecast in the beginning of the quarter had a bigger sort of X factor, if you will, in the beginning of the quarter than they did towards the end of the quarter. So obviously, as it does for most companies, as you get closer to quarter end, your forecast accuracy goes up. So we measure the accuracy 3 times throughout the quarter. And again, it's important to note here, it's a quarterly forecast. It's not a yearly forecast. Like the sales cycle, we're talking here mostly 2-3 weeks, which is very different than an enterprise play where you could have 12 to 18 months. But regardless, the point is that the managers have to get their hands dirty and understand the deal structure. And that rolls up, and the manager will provide a forecast. The manager has a one-on-one meeting with his or her senior manager or director, depending on how it goes, and they explain the forecast to them. Then the director could change the forecast, or you just roll it up to the VP. The VP is aware of all the parts. They have instrumentation. In this case, we use Power BI, so you can look at every single one of the deals. We can have AI intelligence on top of it, which has the sales reps probability to close. We'll have the AI probability to close, and we'll say, hey, the rep here says there's a 90% probability to close, but the last conversation they had with this company was 2 weeks ago, and that the sentiment analysis wasn't positive. So likelihood to close is very different. So the AI will help score the sentiment and drive the change of the forecast. So long story short, this is very much a bottoms-up approach. So this will give, in the end, the forecast to provide to the finance, the CFO, and ultimately the CEO. The CRO has the ultimate say, but they have all the data at their hands to decide what to do with the forecast. So that's how we did the forecast here. Obviously, if you're doing an enterprise forecast, it's a completely different story. Hopefully that answered your question.
Oh, no, it did. So if I understood it correctly and paraphrase it, there is a very strict discipline and a ritual that you need to follow, number one. But you also said that data and AI plays a good part in giving a different perspective, right? Like in one other conversations, we were talking about this conversational intelligence that has come in from all the transcripts. There is also something called voice of the customer on a forecast call, saying that rep is saying this, data is saying this, but as you said, the sentiment analysis, the voice of the customer is saying this. And that gives you a good 3-dimensional picture of what's going to happen with this deal. I believe that's might be the good framework of how you keep yourself ahead of forecasting and predictability.
I couldn't agree more. The key here is that there is, at a high sales velocity company, it's the customer sentiment. If it's $1,000 deal, you didn't talk to the customer 2 weeks ago, that may or may not matter. So that's the things that we try to take into account here. So you can't just let AI run the forecast. You need that human element in there as well.
Absolutely.
But yeah, absolutely. I think a hybrid version I've heard the term vibe selling, which I'm not a big fan of. Vibe coding makes sense, but not vibe selling, certainly not vibe forecasting, but a hybrid version where you use AI to supplement the information that you have. And this works best for us in the US. We have forecasting in EMEA and APAC as well, but due to GDPR, we don't have as many sales calls recorded. So the AI in those places only can do their analysis based on the data in Salesforce, which may or may not be as accurate.
I love the idea of vibe forecasting. It's just whatever you feel like that day. That's so good.
I'm going to steal that. That's
Yeah. I'm just vibing this. We'll get there, right?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a CRO try that in a meeting. We'll get there. Okay. We need to find a new CRO. So one of the ongoing tensions in revenue organizations is that RevOps can get hyper-focused on systems and reporting and process, while the field is often worried about hitting quota and closing deals. So the challenge is making sure RevOps initiatives actually help the sales win deals faster. So from your experience, how can RevOps teams better align with what sales leaders and reps actually care about? Things like quota attainment, win rates, and sales cycle.
So for us, it's being very close to the sales team. Part of our sales enablement group right now includes former sales reps and sales managers that have actually carried their own book at the company for a period of time. And they help us see what would work and what doesn't work, what the reps are missing, like what do they actually need to improve their sales. So at this company, they were notorious for hiring people that may have had their first or second job at a college. They could have come from a retail environment. It's their first office job, and certainly did not have any form of Salesforce discipline from before. So working with these established sales leaders and getting them to explain to management that they will need different training than somebody who may have 5-10 years of office experience and worked with Salesforce or HubSpot, whatever the CRM is before, it is a very different premise. So we tailored sales enablement to different ones. We have a standard operating procedures or standard place. We have a big, thick book, which we bring out for some sales enablement events. Everybody has the Bible, but let's be honest, like no self-respected salesperson is going to carry around a little Bible with them and look stuff up. You learn on the job and you get better at it. We had a very complicated quoting process, which dragged down sales. So it's part of sales and revenue operations to work with the quote to cash process to speed that up. We twice bought a company that basically could turn around a quote, like you could buy their product online in 20 seconds, just like you go sign up for Netflix in 20 seconds, maybe 30, whatever it is. But the point here is that we were able to turn around a 20-second process into a 24-hour turnaround. So that's not a good accomplishment. So we had to fix that for a lot of times. And that came down to sales revenue operations to identify this obvious problem and fix it so that you could actually do sales a lot faster. And that leads into how does your tech stack help facilitate that, and shoving every single acquisition into one Salesforce is good and it's bad. If you do a quick merger, then you have all the fields available to you, but you don't necessarily bring the best things from the previous Salesforce over. You're basically just duplicating it over, and you end up with this very clunky Salesforce that Salesforce themselves may have decided not to support anymore because it's too clunky. It's still sitting on classic, so then you have to have a huge reorganization in your Salesforce. But the point here is that it's up to sales and revenue operations to identify this, maybe not to fix all of it. Some things absolutely they can fix, but highlighting these matters to the appropriate executives and working with them and identifying a plan how to dig yourselves out of it. Same thing we noticed a lot of sales reps tended to maybe sell non-term agreements. A lot of evergreen was sold. Why? It was just simply easier, but we made the reps recognize that they made more money through the use of accelerators if they sold a 3-year deal or a 1-year deal. The customer would save money on signing a 3-year deal, let's say, than an evergreen deal. Obviously, it's a cheaper price per month. And at the same time, the rep noticed, okay, so I made more money on this deal. I'm going to shift my behavior from being able to counter the arguments of the customer of why they should sign evergreen versus a 3-year agreement. So those are my thoughts there. Hopefully that answered your full question, and happy to double click anywhere.
No, I liked it. Yeah, nothing changes sales behavior like compensation changes.
That's right.
So weaving that into your sales operations process can be really beneficial for that. But again, that's also enabling them to be able to do things quickly and get responses to the customer and get the customer signing and moving forward.
That's right.
Because nothing kills a deal like a nice, slow quoting process.
That is very true.
And that really leads us to the second part of this, right? Because there is a big revolution of revenue management. Right? Earlier, there were siloed departments, sales operations, deal desk, revenue ops. And most of the time for revenue ops, CPQ was their center of technology stack, which said that, oh, we take control of this, we can control forecast, and we do that, right? But over a period of time, we are seeing an end-to-end revenue management has evolved, right? From quoting to billing to revenue recognition. Now, a question to you really is, how do you think organizations are shifting? Because this is a change from the traditional CPQ implementation-based approach or maybe revenue ops-based approach towards a broader revenue strategy. And what does that shift mean for deal velocity and margin control? And is it good, bad? Where is it really helping?
Yeah, CPQ was great for us when I started at the company. It helped, had nice quotes, everything worked. But then we started noticing, as I'm sure all companies know, that a lot of the revenue leakage, for lack of a better word, happened outside of CPQ. So basically, you would have a quote, but then a lot of negotiations and things like that happen around the quote, and CPQ wasn't necessarily helping there. And they basically just presented the quote, and the whole approvals process really went off the rails for us. And we had sales reps trying to game the approvals process, which obviously is never a good thing. It takes a little bit of time for us to realize it. That high velocity for us was over 60,000 deals a year. We have a go-to-market organization of about 1,300 people, and we have renewals organization. We have over 100 specialists like sales overlays. So it's a huge engine, and recognizing every time the quote process breaks down, especially at the end of quarter, let alone end of year, very difficult. So after the fact, we can do the analysis and say, wow, we ended up having a lot of issues like deals that shouldn't have gone through the approvals process, but that did because it was end of quarter, or too many deals were signed on an evergreen basis versus a 1-year or 3-year basis because they just want to chug through them a lot faster. Whatever the case may be for a less than great deal would happen. And CPQ didn't necessarily help with that. Like the bigger revenue cloud platforms basically have better policy automation and pricing guardrails, and you can get real-time insights from it a lot better. So that's why we switched over to, frankly, Revenue Cloud, and that helped immensely. We're still seeing a lot of issues in the past that we're figuring out today.
Okay.
As the revenue organizations tend to mature, though, new roles keep emerging. So there's like, before it was sales ops, they had a deal desk, they have enablement, they now have RevOps. Sometimes these boundaries between them aren't very clear. Every person we've talked to, it's a different breakdown.
Yep.
And that can create some confusion around actually who's owning this revenue.
Absolutely.
And who's in charge of that execution. So how should companies think about dividing the responsibilities across the RevOps, SalesOps, deal desk, and such, so that revenue engine actually runs a little bit more smoothly?
Good question. I don't think we have figured it out perfectly. First of all, you have to be a company of a certain size to have these issues. I don't necessarily think a company of 50 million warrants this discussion. I'd say 250 million plus. You have to have some deal velocity, and you have to have enough people. Frankly, like a smaller company should only have 1 2, 3, 4 people in sales operations to help them with the deals. Maybe you clobber in some, help with marketing, MarOps, and things like that. But if you're a larger company, again, which we were running a 1,300 person go-to-market organization, you definitely have, in our case, 100 plus sales and revenue operations group that's doing heavy into, in this case, in our old system, because our systems couldn't handle the load, so we were very manual. We had a large number of people in the quota cash area. And they, obviously, if you're going to have a lot of people and you're, like I mentioned, in the 1.5 billion mark, you're not going to have all those people in the US or in situ. So we used a lot of outsourcing. We used help from other countries, which is great. But unless you have top end leaders that sit with these people, there is a lot of mistakes. And it doesn't matter if you're using people from Romania, India, Colombia. Every country is roughly the same. It's the same thing in the US, frankly. If you outsource to the US or brought in consultants, you would have issues unless you have a standard process and somebody managing it. For us, we basically delineated it. A lot of the sales operations help with the day-to-day operations of them, and they help identify issues, meaning specifically, we're big fans of building out reporting that is standardized. Like in a high sales velocity organization, you don't have enterprise sales, so you don't need sales reps trying to reinvent the wheel. Like, we know what works, and we'll produce the reports that works for that. If you have some special idea of, hey, I want to sell to this type of people, bring that up to your manager or somebody, and we can create some sort of standardized process for it. But we have a sales process that works, and we ask you to follow that. Now, I recognize this job isn't for everybody. So if you have 15 years experience selling to Salesforce.com or Oracle, then this job is not going to be for you.
Really?
Yeah, but regardless, so the sales operations side basically helps handhold the sales reps and the sales managers. They'll alert sales enablement if there's a process breakdown. But then the revenue operation stuff is a little bit more strategic. We help find the greenfields. We help the CRO and the CFO, the CXO level, basically on how we take new products to market, where we're going to sell them, how the overall processes work, but they're not necessarily in the day-to-day of the individual sales rep. They work at a higher level. And then you have deal desk that operates down at the bottom. We bring them in from both sides. They help handhold a lot of the reps in creating these quotes if they're too complicated, or they help them on specific deals, on structuring deals. And at the same time, we bring them in for revenue operations on, hey, what do we do to bring this to market? Like, how should we work it? So that's how it worked for us.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I think you did touch upon when I asked you earlier about the rise of revenue management, but I really wanted to drill down into it, because what has happened over a period of time is the GTM tech stack has really grown very high. And it's for all the right reasons, right? But the solution has been that we have a problem, let's go and get a product that solves that problem, right? It's a pointed solution, because of which the tech stack has really become big. What we have started realizing after the introduction of AI is that now all products have AI into it. So you're paying for SaaS monthly money, plus now you're paying for AI credits. And that has blown up everybody's OpEx budget and customer acquisition cost. And we are hearing a lot of leaders saying that, how do I bring that down? What do I do? So my question really is going to be twofold to you. One is, how do you design a good forward-thinking revenue stack, in your opinion? And second part of that question is, what would be your opinion in terms of how do you reduce this OpEx, and how do you avoid locking into these buying too many AI solutions? So that is really what we would like to get some insights from you.
Yeah, so we were actually relatively light on the tech stack, to be honest. We built some homegrown systems. We had very good technical people, and we had good R&D people, and we had good Salesforce developers that were able to build out a lot of things that we needed in-house, for good and for bad. For example, there is a very commonly used company out there, doesn't matter who they are, that help do call recording, sentiment analysis, helps the reps. We had them through one of our acquisitions. We used them. We tried to make it work. They were great. but it was way more expensive than we were spending on building something that had a portion of the functionality, but the portion that we needed for a fraction of the cost. So there are some companies out there that can use these big companies extremely well, but they tend, like you said, to have a problem and they get a tool that fixes that one problem, but that may be 10% of what the tool can do. And the tool is very expensive. And there's 90% of functionality that I don't want to say it wasn't implemented correctly. It probably was, but probably somewhere in the implementation that you didn't educate the entire enablement team. And frankly, at the company I worked at one point, we had 30% turnover. So the people that you trained when the tool went live may not be the people that are there today, let alone like a year or two down the road. And things change, especially in these hyper-growth SaaS companies. So at some point, maybe you need to take a pause and look at the tools you have, bring in their sales enablement team, and maybe before you're due for a renewal, and have a discussion on how else you can use the tool. Because a lot of people, like you said, they have a problem, they get a tool, and then they have another problem, they get another tool, they have another problem, they have another tool, whereas the first tool probably could have solved a lot of these issues. So we ran a very lean tech stack, for good and for bad. Part of it was because we work on Salesforce Classic because of a lot of the legacy systems, and these modern tools simply can't interact with Classic. So the prerequisite was to switch to Lightning, which would have to bring in a consulting firm to do. So a lot of stuff that we built in-house worked, for good and for bad. We had call recording tools. We had recordings that were available in Salesforce. We had everything tied together in Snowflake. We had AI engine that could analyze the calls in either Salesforce or natively Snowflake. It was just easier to pick up all the data from one place. But at one point or another, you need to take a break, see what you have there, see what you're paying for, see what the reps are using. And again, you're in a hyper-growth company. Who the heck has time for that? And you're not going to bring in a consulting firm that doesn't know the business to try and solve that portion. But I don't think there is a perfect answer here anywhere across the board. I think switching out your RevOps leaders here and there might be a good idea because, including myself, you get bogged down in 7 years of history. Like part of your brain still operates at that $200 million company level, and now you're 1,000 people big, and you think, hey, I can't switch out that system because it worked great when we were 400 million in ARR revenue. But now we're infinitely more complex. EMEA and APAC play a bigger part in the overall revenue than they did before because the markets have matured over there as well. So there are all these things that are coming into play. So I'm not necessarily a big fan of having way too many tools that you don't pause and check out how they work together. And a lot of these tools, there is AI solutions out there. And I think the CEO of Klarna recently said on a podcast that basically development is essentially free. Software development is free, which I don't think it is today, but you can find AI tools that can do 80% of what you need. And a lot of times that's good enough and better than what you have today. Obviously, in a company that works in cybersecurity, you want to make sure that all this stuff is locked down so you're not leaking data through an AI that you may not own holistically, and everything has to be past the CISOs organization and lots of fun things to jump through. So it's not as fast as see a tool, buy it. Now it's see a tool, get the demo, get approvals for it, and then when it's finally set and installed, you may have done things a different way.
We've had more CISOs involved in a lot of the transformations in the last year because of that, because everybody's got a co-pilot, everybody's throwing in on an AI, and you're like, yeah, it's nice to put that tech in, but you have no idea what just happened to your customer data. And if you're in the GDPR, it's a whole different animal.
100%.
And any of the finance or healthcare or anything where you're having really important customer data, I'm literally sitting on my desk. I have telling me that they just gave away all my data. I'm like, great. There's a little notice. Thank you. I don't even know who you are. So yeah, I can see why a CISO is having some issues with enterprise automation.
Absolutely.
Cool. So one last thing, just a real quick, because you've gone through this hypergrowth, you get a sense of how to either put the brakes on or put the gas on. And when it comes to tech, when it comes to process and building out a revenue engine. What advice would you give to upcoming RevOps people or SalesOps people looking to move into revenue operations, or a company, a business owner trying to go, okay, now I've got to figure out how to build a revenue. When do I move from one to the next? So what sort of advice do you give for people to keep in mind as they move forward, either in their career or as their business model's changing?
I think for a business owner, you follow the immediate needs. So you start off with salespeople, you get a sales manager to manage the salespeople, and you get a sales leader. And then you're like, oh shit, they're wasting the time creating reports and all this stuff. So you get the SalesOps guy. And then you're like, okay, these deals, they need to be better structured, et cetera. So you bring in the deal desk to help them with that. The people you bring in last should be the revenue operations, because in my opinion, they're more strategic. They will help your company maybe tomorrow, but the sales ops and the deal desk, they help you today, if you will. So at least from our side, revenue operations tends to be both forward-looking and analyze past behavior a lot of times, but the sales operations guys are the ones that can roll up their sleeves together with the deal desk and sort out issues right away. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these companies included sales driven. You can say your product first, et cetera, but if nobody's buying your product because they simply can't go through the deal process, then you don't have anything to pay the bills with. So that's my opinion. Sales first. You need guidelines and you need lockdown. You don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So you definitely have to have the controls in place for have a good sale. But at the end of the day, you need the sales to bring in the revenue, and then you can think about the rest.
Excellent.
So,
yeah, I would talk in my early career in banking and finance. It was like a controller tells you what happened, a CFO tells you where to go with it, and there's a difference in when you need one.
That's exactly right.
And at some point, and I think the same idea, you need sales ops because you need immediate action because you're moving fast. You eventually will need RevOps, but not all at once. And so they don't do the same thing, and there is a distinction. And I think that's part of the evolution of revenue operations, where it's like there's enough in the middle where we need to start putting a new role in. So
100%.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Jonas, for joining us.
Jay.
Yeah, very exciting conversation. Any last thoughts before we close?
No, I'm good. The things that I think are very important that not enough companies are talking about is the gap between and revenue, but that's more a CFO discussion. But we certainly have revenue operations and sales enablement to educate the reps on what good deals look like to narrow that gap as much as possible, because at the end of the day, investors are looking for the revenue, even though they say it's ARR, but they want to make sure that the gap between ARR and revenue isn't there. So everybody needs to be aware of what that is, and you need to structure your processes and deals so that gap is as tight as possible.
Excellent. Okay. And everyone, thank you so much for checking in with us on this Revenue Architect podcast. Jonas, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insights. This has been great. And we look forward to you watching this. Like it, share it, subscribe to us on YouTube, and we will see you later. Thanks so much, Jonas.
Thank you.
Thank you.